Welcome to the Ghost Show online, my fiends, booze, and ghouls. Your hosts, Seika Groves, Rachel Benter, and Ian Russell will discuss all things paranormal. Prepare to be afraid.
Everybody, welcome to the Ghost Show. I am Seika Groves, and I am your afterlife switchboard operator. And my co-host here.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ian. I am also one of the hosts of the Ghost Show, and I'm a paranormal researcher and a paranormal investigator.
And we're waiting on Rachel today. She's busy off doing other things, so hopefully she'll be able to join us at some point in the show. But today we're going to be talking about this mysterious airplane. And I know we touched on it last week just at the end of the episode. And so, Ian, I'm going to let you drive or steer or fly the show today because I don't know a lot about this plane, but I'm really intrigued to find out. So why don't you start by sort of filling us in on the whole concept of this haunted plane?
Okay, well, for today's show, we are going to go into the desert, and we are going to talk about an airplane that is named Lady Be Good.
Oh, okay.
Now, the Lady Be Good was a B-24 bomber in World War II with the United States Army Air Force. The airplane was based at an airstrip called Sulich, which was near Benghazi in Libya. And on its first mission, it was scheduled to take off in a formation group to bomb the harbor docks at Naples in Italy.
Oh,
and unfortunately, for the crew of the Lady Be Good, this was their first and last mission. Air crew in the B-24 was 9 individuals. And in the case of the Lady Be Good, the pilot was Lieutenant William Hatton, co-pilot Lieutenant Robert Toner, navigator Lieutenant D.P. Hayes, bombardier Lieutenant John Woravka, flight engineer Sergeant Harold Ripslinger, radio operator Sergeant Robert Lamotte, flight engineer Guy Shelley, radio operator Vernon Moore, and those last 2 were also gunners, in addition to their flight engineer and radio operator duties. And then the third gunner was Samuel Adams. Now, as I say, the plane had been scheduled to take off in 2 groups to bomb the harbor at Naples. And the Lady Be Good was one of the very last aircraft in the second group to take off, which meant that it fell behind and they really struggled because they had to catch up to the main group so that these 2 groups of aircraft could form together into one massive bombing platform. And what happened is, with the Sahara and everything in that Mediterranean region, they encountered a severe sandstorm.
Oh, really?
And the weather was terrible, poor visibility. The target was obscured, and they had to abort because they had no way of knowing where they were bombing because they couldn't see. And so they aborted the missions, the groups of aircraft, they turned back around and were going back to base. And it was on this return trip back to their air base that Lady Be Good ran into the problems that it encountered.
Now, before we continue, Rachel has arrived, so let's
excellent.
Let's welcome her to the show.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here.
Glad you could make it.
Another week, another show.
That's it. So
and it's not the vampire show this time.
That's it. Ian's been talking about the Lady Be Good, which is today's show topic. We're talking about this airplane. So, Ian, if you want to kind of continue and tell us a little bit more about what happened during the, I guess, this was an actual military exercise that they're on now. It wasn't like training.
Yeah, no, this was an actual bombing mission to go and bomb the harbor at Naples in Italy. Okay, so as I mentioned, they ran into sandstorm, weather issues, had to abort the mission and turn back to their Air Force base. What happened is that the aircraft's radio direction finder stopped working.
Oh.
And this direction finder on those old airplanes is part of the major navigation system that they rely on to know what direction they're going, like in conjunction with a compass.
Right.
The navigator would listen to a radio signal in his headphones, and he could correlate distances and directions. Well, this unit failed. So what happened because of this, they failed to then at that point recognize where they were. And they thought they were still over the Mediterranean. And what in fact had happened already is that they had already overflown their base going back, and they were now headed out into the desert over land, even though they were thinking they were still out over the sea. And what happened is they went 400 miles off course beyond their Air Force base, still thinking they were out over the Mediterranean. And so, of course, what happened is the airplane began to run out of fuel. And by this time, it's dark, it's night. They can't see anything. Obviously, there's no lights out in the desert. They've got their radio direction finder not working. They don't know where they are. And so, it's, as I say, it's believed that the men assumed that they were still flying over the Mediterranean. And as the airplane began to run out of fuel, they made the decision to bail out of the airplane. And that's what they did. Out of the crew of the 9 men, 8 of them survived the bailout. The 9th one, unfortunately, had his parachute fail to completely open. So he was killed immediately.
Oh, no. So sad.
Now, after they bailed out, surprisingly, the aircraft kept going.
Oh, weird.
For another short period of time. And it then finally did run out of fuel and just, belly landed in the desert. And what I have here, it says it was about 15 miles. The plane made it unmanned, flew for another 15 miles and then crashed. And when it crashed, it just literally snapped the airplane in half. And so the men, there they are now, 15 miles away from their airplane. Again, they didn't know where they were. You'd think it would have made sense if they'd known where the airplane went down. They could have rendezvoused with the plane for shelter. It still had water, provisions, et cetera, et cetera. But unfortunately, what happened is because once they realized, okay, we're on the ground, we're in the desert, they still believed that they were very close to the Mediterranean, not 400 miles away.
Right.
So they started walking in the opposite direction from where the aircraft wreckage now laid, and 400 miles. They just walked out into the desert, into the middle of nowhere, and all the men perished.
I guess, yeah, they wouldn't have had any food or water, or
And so now let's move ahead in history.
Right. So
from 1943, let's now go to 1958.
Oh, all right.
And there were British geologists working for an oil company, and they were flying over the Libyan desert. And these geologists are the one who spotted the wreckage of the airplane. Now, it hadn't been found before that, because even the Air Force, when it was recognized that the aircraft was overdue, didn't come back, they assumed it had crashed into the Mediterranean, not the desert.
So they weren't going to find it
because there was no search effort made.
Oh wow!
And it wasn't until 1958
That's
that
sad.
these geologists were flying, and they saw the crashed B-24. They contacted the Air Force and said, hey, we just saw this crashed American World War II bomber. And the Air Force went, we don't have any record. We have no record of a bomber going down where you said it was.
Right.
So they sent an expedition team out to check this out. And that's when they fully discovered the wreckage of Good. There was another expedition after that, in 1959, the next year. They set out to try to find the crew. And
that's interesting.
There were clues, because as these poor guys were trekking across the desert, they were leaving clues behind them. They would leave a shoe pointed in the direction they were going. They would leave their parachutes in the shape of an arrow pointed in the direction they were going.
Okay,
so they did actually find some of the remains of the crew. That was the first search. 6 months after that, in 1960, they set out to try to find the remaining ones, again, which they were successful in doing. And that's the historical story of the Lady Be Good.
Now they find this plane wreckage. They find the men's bodies. I guess that's good closure for the families, because they can now at least inter them somewhere back home, wherever they came from, other than the 9th person that was never found. But now, in terms of the plane, what happens to that? Do they just leave it out there in the desert and mark it as, found? Or
Well, what happened is, that's a good question. What happened is the Air Force scavenged what they could from the airplane because the way it landed, it didn't just, blow up and
Right,
explode, hitting the
disintegrate.
ground. It kind of skidded into the desert, broke apart into two pieces, the front and the back,
Right.
with both of those pieces still intact, just broken
Right.
apart.
Yeah, it sounds like
And
it's right down and then just literally hit the ground. Boom, probably slid for a bit and ended up, just breaking in half.
right.
Point.
So because the airplane was not just completely destroyed into tiny little pieces when it hit the ground, all the equipment and everything inside was still in good condition. They said even the guns, when the recovery crew was there, the guns were still operable. The guys were in there; they were shooting off the guns.
Wow.
They still worked, and so many pieces of the plane were scavenged and were used as spare parts for other aircraft.
Okay.
And now here's where the paranormal in this story comes
Well,
in.
outside of the fact that 8 men from the crew died, well, all of them died, but they have 8 recovered bodies. Yeah, that's pretty impactful. I wonder if they would have survived had they stayed on the plane.
They probably actually would have. I mean, maybe not all of them, because
Depending
you
on
see
where
the photographs, and it's a pretty messy impact. But the main structure of the airplane was still intact, and I'll bet, they probably would have survived if they'd stayed with it. But again, the issue is that they thought they were over the water.
Yes, yeah.
Which is why they bailed out.
Of course, yeah, you have better chances. So now we've got this plane, it's been found, and is it still the US Army at that point that's in charge of scavenging the plane and
No, at that point it is the United States Air Force.
Okay.
As we know it today.
Okay, so now they're the ones that are going to they're taking salvaging and using.
They're salvaging what they can.
Okay.
Yeah.
And as I say, here's where the paranormal comes in. Good point that you made that, okay, you got 9 deceased men. I've not heard any paranormal stories at all regarding the crew.
Okay.
Everything that talks about the hauntings from this airplane comes from the actual airplane itself.
Interesting.
And it's these scavenged parts that were then put onto other aircraft. And it's interesting that every single one of these other airplanes that received a piece of Lady Be Good ran into incidents and crashes. Every single one.
Oh, no way. That's wild.
There was one airplane. It crashed into the sea somewhere. I'm not sure what sea it was, but it was a crash into the ocean, and very few parts washed up onto whatever shore it was where this crash took place. And one of the parts that washed up was from Lady Be Good.
Really?
Oh,
that's
wow.
There's another incident that took place in the 1970s, which is very reminiscent of this story. And there was an L-1011 aircraft called Flight 401 from Eastern Airlines. In the 1970s, crashed in the Florida Everglades.
That's right.
And exactly the same thing happened. Is they salvaged pieces of the wreckage and put it into
into
other
other
aircraft.
planes.
And the
Mhm.
same thing happened, is that all these other aircraft that received pieces of Flight 401 started experiencing supernatural occurrences.
It's
Yeah.
interesting, right? Because we always associate these kinds of things with people. It's like, oh, it's haunted by the spirit of a person. But
Not always. Yeah.
no, and that's just it. But I'm often intrigued by stories like this one because you have this residual effect within the plane. And that I feel like the fear of the crew, not just that it's their first mission, but the whole after effects and including to the point where they have parachuted away from the plane, hopefully to survive. They don't even know. I mean, can you imagine? You're it's the dead of night, it's pitch black, you're out in the middle of nowhere, you think you're over the Mediterranean, so you're preparing yourself to land in water that really, how are you going to survive that? In general, you might survive an hour or so, but the weight of that parachute is going to suck you down into the water. And so if you can't get out of your release harness, all of these things that must have been going through their heads, and then to find themselves on, terra firma, but now they're in the middle of the desert and, it's daylight and they realize they're nowhere where they thought they were. All of this probably, just propels itself. And even though that happens after the fact, it's still part of the story of the plane. And so it's one of those, again, like we spoke at the Steamboat Inn with my experiences with the sounds of the Civil War happening in the distance. Is this a residual thing? But then do you think that residual energy, and I'm going to ask you both this question, and if you can answer me in your own manner, like Rachel, residual energy,
Yes.
do you feel that plane, as its parts are used in other things, that residual energy could cause further accidents on other planes that the parts are put into?
That's a tough one. I do actually. Yes, I do. I do think that. It's just too much common occurrence of that happening. You hear of it with dolls too, where or even car wreckages where the parts. I think it was James Dean's car.
Yes. I did a whole episode
He
of
was
that on
yes.
the shows I was on. Mm-hmm.
That's right. Where, people's cars have had, they've saved them from wrecks, but people died in the accidents. And I believe like the residual of those parts. But I think it goes further than that. Because apparently people who have heart transplants have visions of the person that the heart belonged to. Like they have that, they feel like a strong connection to the body part that was put into them like a heart
I could
transplant.
see that
So
happening
I
because you're literally
yes,
absorbing someone's DNA when you
exactly,
receive someone else's organ, and that organ becomes part of your body, but that organ had a lived existence in a previous body, and that DNA
yeah,
thing is within all of your entire body. So I can get that. And I suppose in a way with a piece of equipment like an airplane, that there is an almost like an electrical DNA coding, right? An electrical coding that's within
exactly,
the parts or within the wires and the
exactly.
electronics. And so
It's
perhaps
just
that experience,
I hear the phrase correlation doesn't equal causation. I
right?
know we're not
Yeah,
supposed to go along that as scientists, but at the same time, it's too coincidental, for me
right.
to ignore it. It happens too often.
What do you think? Do you
Yeah.
think that that's something too? Like there's a probability of that, that almost that, electronic
I do,
absorption
yeah.
of energy? Do you think that can
I
happen?
agree with that. Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
Definitely. Oh, yeah.
What's your thoughts on that? Like just in terms of, does it sound
Me?
plausible?
Okay, well, I feel like as a paranormal investigator, I've been to different houses where I also see like a mindset. So people say, well, my mother used to sit in that chair, so it's gonna be like there's gonna be residual energy, or there's gonna be, she died in that chair. So there's something in their mind about that particular item of furniture that, whether it's residual or not, in their mind it is.
Mhm.
So I find that when I go, like, I try to stay non-biased. They're like, well, you're going to find activity in that chair. Well, sometimes that's not always the case. But yeah, when it comes to residual energy, I think we need to keep an open mind. I think it's all too easy sometimes to go, oh, it's definitely, XYZ. And we have to sort of debunk some of these things too, at the same time.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Ian, in your thoughts, do you feel like residual energy has the ability or I guess, the energy to transfer to another, say, electrical or, just a part, like a plane part, if it's being put in another plane? Do you think that residual energy can interfere with in this case, the planes that that received the parts from Lady Be Good?
I believe so. Yeah.
Here's a thought, right? So where are these pieces of the plane kept now? Like they salvaged this plane. Is there anything that people can go see, or is there something on display? And from those pieces, do people actually have any further stories in terms of paranormal experience?
I do not know about any further stories.
Okay.
There are pieces that are available to view. What's left of the wreckage itself
Mhm.
is stored on some Air Force base, I think still somewhere there in Libya.
Oh, okay.
I doubt, because it's an Air Force base, that you would be allowed to go and view it.
Hmm.
Where you can go and view pieces of the wreckage, and I have personally done this and I've seen them myself,
Okay.
is at the Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio.
Oh,
They
okay.
have one of the engines and one of the propellers on display.
What happened was error, human error, right? I mean, what happened to that
Well,
aircraft
a human error
was
based upon an equipment malfunction.
that's right. And that's sort of the difficult thing when we think about it. So I don't think there was any real paranormal or, any kind of curse or anything attached to the plane right off the top. But now we have a instance of a, piece of wreckage. And while there are some interesting anomalies, things happened with equipment that's put into other planes, there's nothing to say that the pieces that currently are out there have any sort of, supernatural curse on them, so
Yeah,
don't touch it because, it's not like the Hope Diamond, right? you know,
exactly.
it's that kind of thing, right? It's kind of I mean, this is an interesting conundrum because human
Mhm.
error, weather, all of these things played into a very unfortunate event for young men who,
Mhm.
didn't get to come home. And so there's
Oh.
that side of the story. But there's
Mhm.
also, this added side to the story of these other aircraft that perhaps experienced negative things based on the Lady Be Good show today, guys. I guess that's a wrap for us. And everyone, stick around for next week or visit us again for next week because we're going to be talking about Poveglia Island.
Haunted
Woohoo!
Islands. Woo! It's gonna
All
be
right.
great. I'm looking forward to it.
In Venice, Italy. So from me,
Yes.
Seika, I will say goodbye. See you again next week.
Thank you for watching The Ghost Show Online. Join your hosts again next week as they discuss more tales of the supernatural, the paranormal, and all things spectacular. See you soon. See you soon.